All right, as we cross the Rubicon, this is the second bridge for pluralism. So this one is the mystical bridge. And this mystical bridge is interesting, especially for Latter-day Saints who participate in one in which one would call a mystical tradition. At times, like the unification between God and humankind, that in fact is a kind of mystical reality, a kind of monism. So Terrell Givens, in particular, has recently declared that Mormonism embraces a monism. Now, what that actually means is that there isn't a difference, a gap of reality. Someone's being is actually the same being as God's. In most Christianities and Western religions, God and humankind are radically different beings. So in non-dualism, mostly in Eastern traditions, there is a non-dualism where all things are together. This is actually where Latter-day Saints find themselves. So this will be of particular interest as we think about Latter-day Saint pluralism too. Every tradition has a mystical side of its tradition. For example, the mystical side of Islam is Sufism, where there is a direct connection with mysticism. In Judaism, it's Kabbalism. In Christianity, there's multiple forms of mysticism, but Thomas Merton, the Catholic priest, is probably the most renowned mystic in Christianity in the 20th century. But then also Asian religions embrace a kind of mysticism and non-dualism that I spoke of before. So this religious mystical approach is really important. It isn't abnormal. It's actually very, very normal. And if someone isn't a full mystic, there is also always room for someone to express parts of their mysticism in every tradition. So comparing this back to Hick, the philosopher historian, they begin with the human. So the experience of the human. So Hick begins with phenomenology and human experience. No religion can claim to have full, final, unsurpassable truth about the divine. So there's this gap between the absolute and what a human can know. So knowledge is limited because it's dependent upon human experience. And so we express that in Hick. The religious mystical approach, it isn't different in the sense that you can't know all things, but it begins with the divine instead of with the human. So at the heart of every religion is something that exceeds humanity or community or experience. And so, like I was saying before, with Sufism or Kabbalism or Hinduism or Buddhism, the message is this mystical reality. And so the analogy would be, for example, philosophers stress the finitude, the limited concept of humans as receivers of truth. So the problem with the radio. So they would be something like, in the philosophy and historical position of Hick, they would be the radio. So our experience as humans is limited, like the radio. Whereas mystics emphasize that the message we received on the radio is infinite. So there's an infinite, non-finite reality that comes in as this ultimate mystical reality. So Hick would argue in phenomenology that we can examine religion through religious experience. So a mystic would say it's going to be hard to examine any of this because you're talking about an infinite something that you will never really grasp. And so you're dealing with the infinite instead of the finite. So it's this infinite reality, the mystical experience of infinite, ingraspable reality that we need to look at here. So the infinite is in religious experience. It isn't religious experience. So the infinite message can be experienced in all religions because of it, because it's infinite. And so it's not just limited to one radio. Any radio can get access to the mystic reality, the mystical absolute reality. And so you can see like that little, like the radio or the receiver is religion, and the message that can be heard over that radio is infinite. It can say anything and it can embrace all things. And so religions are radios, making the religions finite and the antenna socially constructed and individual. So this is a good point where Hick actually determines that pretty well, the historical philosophical. The mystical radio waves represent a core mystical experience pulsating within all religions. Those who take the mystical bridge affirm that the differences don't dry up the deeper divine radio wave that is captured by the radio antenna and delivered in cultural and linguistic terms. So the mystical message, the mystical reality is so infinite that you could speak it in an infinite number of languages and there could be no overcross, there could be no crossover between those things. It's so infinite. So Felix Wilfrid wrote, there is certainly a unity among religions, but this unity can really be perceived only at the mystical level. And then at the mystical level, it's infinite, so how do you unify everything? And if everything is ultimately ever expanding in infinity. And so this is a good way to sort of express that is you can see this little diagram on the right where you can see the top of the earth and then there's these caverns that dig deep into the earth, and these would be religions like Buddhism and Hinduism and Christianity. So this is where depth gives us a sense of where mystical reality is. So the more individuals devote themselves to their own religion, their own devotion, the deeper they go into their very own tradition, the more they become aware of the mystical experience in other religions. So the surface level of Hinduism will never reach what could be unity in divine reality. It just couldn't. You have to go to these greater depths. And as the greater depths emerge, you can see the value of the other religions and the mystical reality represented in that diagram. So theologians who are mystics have multiplied over the years. This uh, has happened in various religions. The one example we want to look at is I mentioned Thomas Merton before, the Catholic priest. Um, and there's also many Asian theologians who this has been their central focus. But in particular, we have this crossover. Raymond Panikkar. He had a Catholic mother, a Hindu father, and he writes that I left as a Christian, left home, found myself as a Hindu, and returned as a Buddhist without having ceased to be a Christian. So that's a pretty interesting statement, and it kind of gets to the core of what he's talking about. So he became an ordained priest, and he's a practicing Catholic, but at the same time he practices yoga and meditation every day. And so he writes that mysticism is the fundamental religious fact, this absolute fact. He writes, a fact that does not lie in the realm of doctrine, but may well be present everywhere and in every religion. So it's deeper than this intellectual ascendancy of knowledge and doctrine. The idea, the religious fact, is something, this mystical absolute reality that every religion can have access to, like those caverns leading down to the open cavern. Um, and so he calls it an at-one-ment, like an atonement. And at the core of this essential experience in religion, mysticism imbues us with a sense of being at one, connected, united, and part of. So thinking about the diagram in the last slide, so the caves that lead down to the cavern, where you become connected, and that's when you become at one. But it isn't this singular at oneness. It is a kind of non-dualism, a kind of monism, the reality that there is a three-part oneness, and you can't be at one without the three together. And that's the divine, the human, and the world. So in Western philosophy and religion, there's a dualism that always reigns, this Cartesian dualism. Oftentimes in religion, we express it as like a spirit that goes in the body. That's a dualism. Another dualism is the idea that humans are completely separate from God. God is something totally different from humankind. And so the kind of pantheism that emerges in Hinduism, where you are one with God and God is one with you, is a kind of expression that Latter-day Saints would understand, which moves us, distances us from the dualism that sometimes we express, but ultimately don't embrace. And so Panikkar argues that these three parts, the divine, the human, and the world, they are interrelated, they have their being in each other, and they can't exist without each other. And so this, Latter-day Saints understand this as the fact that D&C 93 explains that we were never created. We were always existing with God for eternity. This is that kind of our being exists with each other. And so the three-part oneness cannot be reduced to one part. We exist together and as one, and that is the at one ment. Like all good theologians or philosophers, they have to create their own words to demonstrate this. And they are unique ideas, so they need unique terms to express them. So Panikkar calls this the cosmotheandric reality, the at-one-ment, the atonement, the existence where they are all one, is called a cosmotheandric reality. So Panikkar writes, the divine, the human, and the earthly, however we may prefer to call them, are the three irreducible dimensions which constitute the real, i.e., any reality inasmuch as it is real. So that this is like what is being, what is reality. It's this connection between those three realities. So the divine, whatever the divine is, it breathes and lives within the human and the material. And then with the human, whatever we humans are, we aren't aware of the divine that has its being within us and of the earth that forms us. We don't know who we are. So we can't even express our own identity without the divine. And then whatever the earth is, if we can't sense its sacredness and its oneness with us, we will never properly understand or care for it. The earth might also be expressed as like the carnal reality of a human body. But here's this reality, these bound together is the cosmotheandric reality. Raymond Panikkar writes about this cosmoandric reality that man and God are neither two nor one. There are not two realities, God and man world, but neither is there one, God or man world. God and man are, so to speak, in close constitutive collaboration for the building up of reality, the unfolding of history, and the continuation of creation. God, man, and the world are engaged in a unique adventure, and this engagement constitutes true reality. Cosmotheandrism is in paradoxical fashion, for one can speak in no other way, the infinity of man-world and the finiteness of God. So this cosmo-Andreic experience is so if there's a reality, what is the cosmo-Andreic experience versus just what it is? Like, how do you experience it? And this is like persons sense their unity with the divine and with all fellow creatures, humans and otherwise. And so this is like a reality, an experience. And when you experience all those together, and you then that's when you're actually experiencing the cosmoandric experience or reality. So an experience that calls one to live out that relationship in ever deeper life-giving ways, to foster the unfolding of history and the continuation of creation. And so this is pretty interesting. Like you might compare this, if as a Latter-day Saint, to this like this experience that Nephi or the brother of Jared experiences, this panoptic vision where they experience past, present, and future all at once. And this is what it's like to live in an eternal existence. And so in some ways, this cosmotheandric experience is actually what Panikkar's describing as this most important mystical experience. And so you see the mysticism boiling over as a Latter-day Saint too, when Nephi sees Jesus born, but he also sees the future when all of the Lamanites are given the Book of Mormon. Um, So this means that there are ex-Catholics, according to Panikkar, and ex-Marxists and ex-Buddhists. But, he says, I know of no ex-mystics. So this is interesting. Comparing this back to this cosmotheandrism is much like what Joseph Smith experiences in D&C 76, where he sees the past, the present, and the future. It all becomes aware. He's united with prophets of the past in scriptures who are also seeing this cosmic reality. Nephi, John the Revelator, the brother of Jared, and it's this uniting of all things that are God, human, and earthly. This moment when the unfolding of history is before them, and the continuation of creation is also there with them. So there's an interesting parallel, of course, with Latter-day Saints. So Panikkar spends a lot of time critiquing John Hick, and much of his critique is about his Kantianism. And so in this one, there's one ultimate reality. Please, Dr. Hick, is this really possible? And so the criticism here is Hick's dualism. Hick says there is the phenomenon, the experience of humans, and then this dualistic side is the reality, the thing in itself outside of the human experience. So he's simply set up another dualism that religions have already been dealing with. So he's caught in the same dualistic Cartesian problem of the modern age. And Panikkar says, let's not do this. And so his point is get out of dualism. So religions for Panikkar are like the pieces of different puzzles. Even if they fit together, they're not intended to fit together. You'll never be able to put them together into a pretty picture or final system like Hick has them. And so the idea of going up the mountain to one reality is in fact what Panikkar is criticizing. The thing in itself that everybody's seeking after, the ultimate, the end, the goal for everyone, is not united. And because of the mystic reality in the way that Panikker's looking at these things, this can be his primary critique of John Hick. So the critique of John Hick is pretty clear here. So I'm going to make it a little bit more explicit. So are are we a wave in the sea as a religion, or a post intended to be a marker? That's the big question we're going to look at here. So Panikkar argues we must accept that some religious traditions are mutually incommensurable. They cannot be compared by the same standard. Um, and so the mystery within the religions is a reality that doesn't exist in itself, like Hick is arguing. Imagine the ocean and a post, and that post is pinned to the bottom of the ocean and can't move, and that post is this sense of stability. And so within the ocean, that can't actually represent a religion. As the ocean goes back and forth, you have a standard absolute, like Hick is arguing for. So the mystery only exists with humans and the world. So if the ocean is that reality of world, human, and divine, Hick wants religions to be that stable post in the ocean. So Panikkar shockingly writes, it is not simply that there are different ways leading to the peak, but that the summit itself would collapse if all the paths disappeared. There isn't some reality at the top of that mountain that exists unto itself. It only exists because there are those going up the mountain. Those are not independent of each other. They rely on each other. So the peak is, a certain sense, the result of the slopes leading to it, Panikkar argues. It is not that this reality, the ultimate mystery, has many names as if there were reality outside the names. So these religious experiences begin to define what Hinduism is, for example. But Hinduism doesn't exist without the religious experience. They're connected. So this reality is the many names, and each name is a new aspect. Um, so in an ocean, um, religions become these waves that are movements across the ocean, and eventually they settle, and then there's new waves, and they're constantly creating the reality rather than the ocean leading to a specific pond where it will stay forever. That's just not the way it's working, according to Panikkar. So God, or the divine, is itself as diverse as are the religions. The divine delights in and includes and exists in diversity. So the ocean exists, and it certainly exists within the waves, but the waves are the ocean also. So making God one thing is to confine and jail God, in which God's freedom is eliminated. So you could certainly go to the ocean and take a bucket of the ocean and take it back to your house. But you couldn't call that the ocean, even though it was part of the ocean. And so religions in this sense have in some ways like gotten a big barrel full of water from the ocean and claimed to be the ocean. So Panikkar writes, the living God who speaks through a people, who suffers, who yells or sings or dances, is not a common denominator. The Christian experience of God through Christ is not the same as the Vishnite or the Hindu experience through Krishna. So Krishna is a kind of savior figure, but that savior figure is very Hindu. It's an expression of God that is not Christ or Jesus. So God is unique, therefore incomparable. So we can compare one wave in the ocean to another wave in the ocean, and both of them are unique waves, and both of them represent the ocean. Um, Hick and also the inclusivists create a stable post in the ocean to mark reality, or they scoop a bucket of the water out and define themselves as the ocean. Yet the ocean is marked by its ever-changing and living movement. It cannot be identified by a stable absolute, like a post in the ocean, and it cannot be defined by a bucket or a barrel of water that once was in the ocean. So the question or the statement, beware of unity in religions, beware of the modern construct that is religion. So we talked about earlier in the course the idea that the concept of religion is a unifier. It unifies very different and diverse and even incommensurable systems of spirituality and institutions of what become religion. So religion, the term religion, unifies where it was never intended to unify. And so Panikkar argues pluralism, that is, the diversity of religions or of the divine, does not allow for a universal system. A pluralistic system would be a contradiction in terms. Um, and so the term plural and the term system are contradictions. This is how religion is represented, right? So religions were intended to unify very different things. And so it's using the concept of plurality and system. So it's systematized plurality. So by systematizing religions, which are plural, we now run into the problem where a mystic would want to say, let's let them be plural and diverse. We don't need to unify them in a system. The very notion that they are getting at, the mystical reality, is enough to unite them, or at least to preserve their diversity and make them relevant. So the incommensurability, the lack of common measurement for comparing two values of ultimate systems is unbridgeable. This incommensurability is not a lesser evil, but a revelation of the nature of reality. Reality is that there are ever-changing, diverse differences throughout eternity. So religion is a modern construct, a false unifier, a pretense for monopoly. So religion is actually a way to usurp power, the modern concept of religion. All religions must give up any pretense to monopoly of what religion stands for, and instead seek to work through your own religion, driving deeper down the cave into the cavern of reality that will then allow people to recognize the reality of mysticism and the connection between the religions. So Panikker's criticism of religion, that it's a category, it's an umbrella term that actually does damage. It really does ask the question, so why is Panikkar a mutual pluralist then? And he makes this very clear. He is a mutualist because in the mystic reality, that's where it's united, not at the religion level. The religions need to remain diverse. And so let's look at this a little closer. So pluralism for Panikkar means scattered, unconnected manyness, right? So he loves that pluralism. He thinks it's a fact and it will never change. Within the reality of plurality, there can be relational unity as plurality. So you connect together mutually as pluralists. So because there is diverse plurality, that's what you're unified about. That's where you're mutual with other religions. And so he thinks through this mutual fecundity, so mutual growth between the religions, this is where the pluralism really begins to take place. So mutually, religions should embrace difference, hope for more difference, and growth within the various religions. And so here's the fecundity part, mutual fecundity. By relating to each other, all will discover and expand their own identities, recognizing intra-religious diversity acknowledges different ways of being a Baptist, for example. Then each of the various ways of being a Baptist grow exponentially in infinite directions. So you accept diversity and plurality within your religion, and then your religion grows because you're not excluding and getting rid of people because they have some slight difference between an understanding of yours. So this intramutual acknowledgement of diversity creates fecundity. Growth comes by accepting plurality, and plurality comes through the growth of accepting plurality. So similarly, extra-religious diversity creates mutual fecundity in different religions too. It's not just within your own religion. And so the way this happens, so mutual fecundity for Panikkar comes through cosmic trust. A trust, this is what you really need for this. So a liberal Baptist acknowledges a conservative Baptist in dialogue with infinite trust. So in one religion, you're accepting you're part of a religion, but you have so many differences, but you have the trust that you are both Baptists. So the mutual fecundity is fostered through cosmic trust, infinite absolute trust, while disregard, totalization, and homogenization lacks trust and fecundity. So for example, if I'm a conservative Baptist, I want to create a whole different congregation because I don't want liberal Baptists in our congregation. They're not really Baptists. And now you divide and you totalize conservative Baptists and you make them all the same, you homogenize them, and now there is not growth. Now you're shrinking who you are. You are making what you are smaller and more elite or singular. And that's a lack of trust. That's mistrust and disregard. So in that sense, Baptists shrink or divide. And so there is no cosmic trust and there is no mutual fecundity. So between religions, so a Latter-day Saint, for example, acknowledges a Zen Buddhist in dialogue with infinite trust. Cosmic trust allows for mutual fecundity, while disregarding Zen, so if I allow for Zen to be uniquely chasing after this mystical reality, I allow for that to be a fact and accept that that's what they're doing. This is good. While disregarding them or saying Zen Buddhism isn't a true religion, shouldn't be trusted, and there should be uh, there should be lesser of them. Then this demands conversation, and unifying cultures lacks trust and fecundity. So what does this do for Buddhism? Well, it's just like within a religion, this shrinks, it divides, it doesn't build on trust. And so mutual fecundity for Panikkar is the ultimate goal. It is the way pluralism should be expressed, and the way you perpetuate mutual fecundity, mutual growth, is through cosmic trust. Those are his two action words, is we should mutually unite in the growth of each other and the expansion of who we are, and only through cosmic trust. So the big question, of course, with all pluralisms, haven't you given up on your own tradition? Has relativity enabled you to become nothing? Now that you think all things are true, you're no longer a Christian, and Christianity isn't unique. This is the biggest problem, and the threat that many see within pluralism is relativity. So this is the question. What about Panikkar, the Catholic theologian? Um, can he have a maintenance of his Catholicism while believing in this mystical reality? And so he writes, the third Christian millennium is reserved the task of overcoming a tribal Christology by a Christophany, which allows Christians to see the work of Christ everywhere without assuming that they have a better grasp on or a monopoly of that mystery which has been revealed to them in a unique way. So this actually is getting to the point. Like there is are Christians the only ones who have the truth? And he's answering, no, they are not. So he does this in a very clever way. That's a good way to end this module. So this is very important for his Christology. For Panikkar, Jesus is the Christ unequivocally. Jesus is the Christ unequivocally. Yet, Christ is more than Jesus. That this is the crux of the whole matter. Um, and so, for the most part, an exclusivist would say all things through Jesus. Well, he's saying, well, yes, Jesus is the Christ, not denying his divinity, but at the same time, Christ, that title, is more than the man Jesus. There's much more there. So to expand on this, Michael Amalaldos argues the mystery of Christ includes all the other manifestations of God in history. So this big word Christ, Christ is that mystical reality. We cannot claim any monopoly over Christ. We do not possess Christ. But what Christians do have is through Jesus, you find that mystical reality. Jesus is the Christ for Christians. And so this is the crux of the argument of how Panikkar is still a practicing Catholic, a devout priest. Panikkar affirms Jesus unequivocally, but he also opens the door to affirm others as well as Christ's. And so this is that mystical reality that can be accessed as the cavern below the earth, and those as someone becomes a devout Hindu and drives deeper and deeper into the earth. At the center of that is the mystical reality, which is Christ, the Christ. And Jesus for Christians is that Christ, whereas like Krishna may be the Christ in Hinduism, for example. And so this is how you have a mutual pluralism in Panikkar, who has a maintenance of his Catholicism, but also allows the pluralism and of all of the other religions too.